Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Teams for Business podcast. I'm your host, Jack.
I'm Jackie.
I'm Ivan.
I'm Kylan.
Today, we'll be discussing the recent development of 6G devices and how they will pan out in the future. So, this past week, a group of telecommunications firms from Japan kind of teased the world's first 6G device, and the revealed device is 20 times faster than 5G while providing substantially higher capacity and lower latency rates. With the assistance of AI and machine learning, 6G is expected to assist further research and improvements in imaging, locational awareness, and presence technology. So let's first start with a discussion of the existing network, which is 5G. What do you guys know about 5G? And do you guys all use devices on 5G? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so personally, yes. Um and okay, so first of all, I'm not like a super techy person, but I think like for a lot of people who like are just like the common consumer, 5G versus like non-5G devices, there's like they're not like actively like looking for it. And like I personally prefer it just because like I don't know. I'm like kind of picky with this stuff. But like I know for like a lot of people, like my friends, I've never had that conversation with any of them, or like it's just like not a big concern. Like for example, when they're picking out the new iPhone, it's not like, oh, it's 5G, which is why I'm going to buy it. It's more of the fact because it's like the new phone, or like more of the fact that it's something like it just comes with it is like the main point. So like even though I personally find it interesting, I know like a lot of people, or at least like people who aren't like super into tech, it's not like a big deal for them. Like yes, they might notice differences, but it's not like a like everyday talking point, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, so I think 5G has been under a lot of controversy. Um well, I think for now, I think everyone does have access to 5G. I think 5G has become very widespread. But when it was in its beginning days, I think, you know, Chinese companies like Huawei has was dominating the 5G and still is dominating the 5G market. And then, the American government banned them, and then all of a sudden, these other network companies had to figure out, how to establish their own 5G networks, which took a while. Um, but yeah, 5G is very awesome because your Wi-Fi speeds are much quicker. I don't think it's like noticeable quicker, but it is quicker. But I 5G has this downside where it like doesn't go through walls as well because it was higher frequency. But otherwise, it enables more devices to be connected to the network, and it's also faster. So because of these factors, there can be a lot of uses for 5G, um, because of the amount of stuff it can do. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I think I also have 5G. I think most phone plans, when you're just buying a phone plan, usually comes with 5G just because of how widespread it has become, like especially recently. And I only think like, but like with my phone, sometimes the 5G just like if it's in an area that it doesn't have it, it just turns into 4G LTE. And I've noticed that that is like a decent bit slower than when I can get a full bar like 5G connection. So yeah, I do think that 5G is a pretty solid like upgrade from 4G. So it'd be cool to see what happens with 6G, as Jack mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said here. Like I've also been using a 5G plan on my phone for the past 2 to 3 years. It came with it came with when I bought my phone, so it's not like I just like what Jackie mentioned, it's not like I went to the store to buy a phone specifically because I want to use 5G. But 5G has been very effective and it's been very useful. And just like also what Kyvan mentioned, like especially when the in those like rural areas where 5G isn't really that effective, like it's it's still like it takes a little bit of time to load. It goes down to 4G LTE, and there's definitely a little bit of a noticeable difference between 4G and and 5G, but it's not that much noticeable. Um, in comparison with 4G actually, which only has 1 gigabyte per second as its peak speed, 5G is a peak speed of 20 gigabytes per second, and that's obvious that when you compare those magnitudes, that 5G is a lot faster than its like 4G counterpart. And I also know that 5G, just like what Ivan mentioned, uses a lot less power and provides less latency, and that as a result allows a lot more devices to be connected to the same network, and then you can use a lot of those like you can use a lot of that space to do a lot of different things with 5G and everything like that. So moving on, so 6G is still a very, very raw technological advancement as of this podcast recording. What do you think are some of the milestones that 6G will reach potentially in this year or next year and maybe 5 years from now?
I think it's an interesting question, but personally, I think, um, like I don't okay, well, first of all, I think every year, of course, like we're gonna see like scientists and researchers come out with like prototypes of like 6G and like getting closer to like the final device. But in terms of, like the next year, personally, I don't see like like the widespread consumer being able to like buy something that's like 6G. But 5 years from now, maybe. But like the same way like 5G is still like relatively new. Like I don't think we're gonna be phasing out of 5G already, especially like for most people. Um, and like in terms of like, because I think like 6G is still like, as Jack said, it's first of all teasing a device like that. It's not like a final like version yet. It's not like something we can buy, or like it's not anything where it's even close to being able to be bought. And 6G isn't just like, oh, like a new device on itself that has 6G. Like there's so much infrastructure that has to go with it. The same way like there was a lot of like, that's part of the controversy of 5G, like just so much having to be built and just connecting everything. So it's not just like, oh, like this one phone works perfect. Like there's so much like other infrastructure with like cell towers, things like that, that has to work out before 6G becomes widespread. And I think that that will definitely take a few years in the making. And then also like convincing people to like switch onto like 6G.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Jackie said. But I just want to mention that I think, um, just like with 5G, China will also be a very serious competitor for 6G. So, you know, with what happened to 5G, I will also expect it to happen with 6G. Um, but for the next couple of years, I don't really see, because I've looked into some of the research that on 6G, some of the published research, and there's it's still very vague. There's still not a very definite thing like, okay, this will definitely make 6G happen. It'll be like, okay, we've done something and it might lead to 6G. So not right now the research is super bare bones, but I feel like maybe in next 2 years or 3 years, you could see a little bit getting a little bit more solidified. But there's a lot of estimates that deployment of 6G will happen, at around 2030 or 2031, which is like 10 years from now. So, wait, no, not 10 years, 6 years. So, and it's quite a long time, and it's really bare bones currently, but it's definitely progressing along. And you don't have the probably when 6G rolls out, there will be another wave of conspiracy theorists who put tinfoils on their head. And so, but after that, I feel like it'll be just like 5G, where it'll be standardized, because in especially in urban landscapes where there's a ton of people using a ton of devices, 6G will be especially helpful for just connecting these people into the internet.
Yeah, I think with like all new technologies, it takes a while to kind of implement like it on a widespread kind of basis. But with 6G kind of already starting to like get teased and kind of pop up, I think within the next year and within down the line, we're gonna start seeing like initial like rollouts, like starting projects and prototypes of how it's gonna look like or how it's gonna be implemented. But I do think it's going to be a while before like it gets kind of like widespread acceptance. Like with how 5G it took a decent amount of time as well. So I think with every single um new technology as well, it just people take time to kind of like warm up to the idea of changing what's been constant for so long.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also want to approach this topic with a little bit of a different like approach. As we've seen like over like the past like 5 or 6 years, from 2019 when 5G started to come around, like right, it took a lot of time to gain a lot of traction, and obviously it's very widespread right now. Like there's a projection that 5G currently has approximately 1.5 billion subscriptions by the end of 2023 and is expected to grow to 2 billion by the end of this year. So it's obvious that even though it has been released since 2019 and has been around for a long time, it's only become like pretty widespread like fairly recently within the like last 2 or 3 years or something. So point, like 5G has not reached its peak yet, and I feel like there's still a lot of milestones that it has to reach over the next 2 or 3 years. And on the other hand, like as most of us have already talked about, 6G is super raw technological advancement. Even the research is super raw and very bare bones. And I think the milestones that 6G will reach over the next 2 years are mostly all research and development oriented, sorry. And as Ivan said, he's looked into the research. He said he's seen that the research is super vague and unclear, and that's obviously a problem with developing 6G right now. So I think that a lot of investigations, experiments will be in the news, and then that'll definitely lead to some like initial developments. But I don't expect to see any widespread release within the next 2 years. And this is also because like 5G took a lot of time to develop. It also took a lot of costs to develop and make it widespread. That also took a lot of costs. I don't think a lot of companies are ready to switch into 6G like quite yet because that's also going to incur like potentially more costs than the cost of developing and making 5G widespread. So I think a logical timeline for potentially 6G's I guess like rollout and widespread usage. I think 6G will roll out maybe by 2030 or like 2029 or at earliest 2028. But then I wouldn't expect to see 6G very dominant until like 2032 to 2033. That's a very long timeline, but that this projection is just because like we don't have very clear research on this. If we did have more clear research on this, maybe I would project 6G to be more widespread, maybe a little bit earlier, but we're just not sure yet. So moving on now, what should telecommunications companies like AT&T, T-Mobile, and etc. do regarding 6G when more research is released? Have they already started development of 6G networks, and what are some steps that these companies should take to ensure that they might not fall they won't fall behind in this new trend if you were to call it one?
Personally, I was like, first of all, okay, I think that they should start looking at 6G. And then I also specifically was looking at AT&T, one of like the leading companies in this industry. And so one of the articles or like this interview that one of their executives did was just talking about 6G. And so I think like as reflecting the general industry's concerns right now, like they're still like a little bit not 100% sold on it because there's so much like infrastructure needed. There's so much like just like time and effort and like money that needs to put into it for like we don't even know like the results of it. And one of the points that he made was that like 5G isn't necessarily like, even like at the end. It's like it's not old news technology. There's still like a lot of people who aren't like on this like aren't on 5G yet. And so like going into 6G is like, well, you should first need to like convert everyone into 5G first before you start going into like 6G and things like that. And so like the whole point was that like if a lot of people aren't on 5G yet, like what are we doing with 6G? Like there's just a more like available market. And then I think like also something is that like there's this thing called the ORAN, like this alliance thing where it's like a bunch of these companies all together and they're like all of them together and they're trying to have like research done on 6G and other like technology topics relating to it. 6G is just like one thing. And I was like reading through some of their like reports and just talking about it. And so like I think 6G is still like very much like a new thing that's being developed right now, which like we've said before, but like when you look at like for example what AT&T has on their website, it's very brief, very much like, oh, like we're a founding member of ORAN, like that's it. Like it's not very like in depth. And that still like goes back to like the other question we had before of like timeline issues. Like personally, I don't think that it's gonna be happening like anytime soon. But at the same time, because like there's a lot of other companies looking at this. I do think like in order to be competitive within the market, yes, they should be investing into like R&D, but it's not like a big deal like within the relative future at least.
Yeah, so as Jackie said, 5G technology is still like not very old news, and it's still very much developing, and they're still setting up infrastructure for 5G. So I would not tell these network companies to, pick up their speed with developing 6G network and infrastructures. Like, still like a lot of carriers would mark 4G LTE as 5G, um, just to make it seem like, oh, they have the infrastructure for 5G when they really just don't. I mean, these carriers still are having these problems, and I really don't feel like it is a very good financial motive to transition into 6G once it is available. And I would only say do that unless the 5G infrastructure is completely finished, which is not because of the huge setback between, politics, right? So, but like these carriers like AT&T, T-Mobile, they are part of this alliance called the Next G Alliance. So they are definitely currently still doing a lot of research on, using 6G for various things such as like healthcare, which is one very big thing. But it's like this alliance also includes like Microsoft, LG, TSMC, and a lot of like also universities such as like MIT, U of T, UC Davis, like these are very big names contributing to his Next G Alliance, and I feel like, obviously keep on doing research in 6G because it has a lot of industrial uses, maybe not like everyday use, because I feel like 5G is definitely enough for a lot of people, but 6G really helps out a lot of the other industries that require this extra bandwidth, which is like the only thing right now I can really talk about is healthcare because of the many devices necessary for monitoring each patient, especially in like a very big hospital unit. So 6G is definitely very good if it does roll out, but I feel like these internet carriers should focus on completing their 5G infrastructure before moving on to 6G.
I agree with that. But I also think that like in order to kind of stay ahead of the curve, I think these companies like want to, I guess, want to kind of be one step ahead of the competition, and they want to invest in research and development for these 6G products so they can kind of see they can kind of jump out in the industry, because right now these internet providers, like I really couldn't tell you like which one's better. I mean, I use T-Mobile, but um, like if you maybe like if there was if another one would be like cheaper, and it's probably the same. Like I really don't know which one's better. So I do think that especially in this industry, if there's something that one of these companies can do to kind of like stand out more, like possibly being that leader for 6G, then I think these companies are prioritizing on going through with that, and kind of I guess just starting that process earlier, even if like I guess 5G isn't completely implemented yet.
I think it's okay to start research on 6G a little bit, but I don't think that research should be like very like fast or like rushed based on like the pressure of like all the surrounding companies and also all the international companies in both Japan and China that are also developing 6G, because I feel like 5G is good enough for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people also feel that way for the general consumer usage. So I think 5G is gonna continue to do well for the next few years, maybe 3 or 4 years before 6G, like before even something is developed on the end of 6G that could be that could have potential to be used for like the consumer consumer usage. So I so even though there are a lot of patents regarding China in China and United States regarding 6G development, and even though some of the major companies like AT&T and T-Mobile have already begun some sort of research or development, like I think they can like allocate a little bit less of their like funds, maybe R&D costs on on developing 6G just because it's not that much of an issue, like not that much of a concern right now compared to like 5G. Like I think rather those like big companies should prioritize like getting 5G more widespread because obviously I mentioned earlier that we haven't seen it reach its full potential yet. And that's obviously something that we'll see within the next 3 to 4 years. And then during that time, they can also like slowly begin to roll out a little bit of development of 6G. But I think right now it's just not a priority for them. But I think it's still important for them to keep an eye on some of the research and development that's going on in like and those like studies and investigations that get published just to see like what are the issues with 6G and potentially what are the things that are we need to put into our 6G network to ensure that it could be available for usage, whether it's for general consumer usage or just specific usage to like a specific sector or a specific usage in very general terms. So moving on to the last question, what are some ethical considerations with 6G networks, and are they persisting problems from 5G networks and older?
Um, so yes, I think there are like potential ethical concerns with 6G. I think one thing like interesting we haven't really talked about this episode is 6G and AI. Which is kind of like when you search up 6G, like there's a lot about this specifically. And like we all know like the potential harms, like ethical concerns of AI. And so the two interconnected, like you're going to get like problems that like carry over, like for example, bias, like the fairness, things like that. And like the whole like decision making process in AI, like you get like that carried over. Um, and I think there's also like the thing about like privacy and data protection. Like of course, like that's something people are always talking about, especially like in the United States, where like data protection and just like privacy is like a very big deal. And like I know like in the European Union, there's like also like a lot of laws regarding like what data is yours, and you keep it that way. And so I think like navigating that field, especially like legally and just seeing like what goes on, um, is like interesting. And also like with these cases, like there's just a lot of like new things being developed. And like I think there's just like one lawsuit a few years ago, or it might be, I don't know, it was like pretty recent. And it was just about like the data privacy issues and just like what companies are doing with data, specifically about like these new like networks. And so that definitely is an ethical concern. And that kind of also like happened with 5G. Like there's a lot of like when it first came out, there's like a lot of suspicion with 5G of like, okay, is this even necessary? Like what is this? Things like that. And so like that kind of just also goes back to the point of like transitioning and like not transitioning so quickly. But going back to the question, at the end of the day, I don't think that 6G is going to be able to escape without any like concerns about ethics or any concerns about privacy.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But I just want to say something about like the AI thing. I think it's still very much a buzzword for 6G. Like, I don't know if you guys saw the videos, but a lot of the recent AI products that came out, like the pin and the little phone like thingy, that can like it has a camera and be like, okay, what am I looking at right now? And it'll tell you. But AI is still very bearable. I think we got like kind of spoiled by ChatGPT on how good it was, but AI in general is still very bare bones, as seen by the recent very big AI device that had billions of dollars of investment thrown at them, and then their products are very underwhelming. So I think AI, like especially for 6G, is um not gonna really make a difference. But these companies need funding, so they're gonna throw anything possible to make them get money. But I just want to say, like, regarding cybersecurity, I think that's also a very big thing because, especially with 5G, with 5G rollout, there was a very big cybersecurity thing because 5G includes more devices, but also people in general just getting smarter. And the thing with cybersecurity in computers is that computers don't actually generate random numbers. If you can figure out the way the computers generate so-called random numbers, it's very easy to, gain backdoor access to a lot of the devices on the network, and especially with 5G and even 6G. Once you figure that out, you get access to millions, if not billions, of devices. And that's a huge cybersecurity risk. And a lot of companies are still figuring out how to, you know, uh, improve your cybersecurity. But a big thing, you guys should check it out. It's on YouTube. But their big thing was they basically just made cybersecurity, like finding the way the computer generates random numbers, more consuming. Like the computers we have now would take billions of years to um find the randomization sequence, but as 6G rolls around, that billions of years are probably going to turn into a couple minutes, right? So technology is rapidly advancing, but with 6G it comes to the pros, which is faster speeds, more devices. But that more devices also comes with cybersecurity risks, and concerns over, is our data actually still private, especially with the AI. They're gonna have to train that machine learning or AI from somewhere. From the data from somewhere, it's most likely to be acquired from the network itself. So also that information privacy issue.
Yeah, definitely. I guess like privacy and like data security, that's like the main things. When you're thinking about AI, you already have a bunch of kind of like the ethical considerations that you're kind of worried about with AI. And if you're kind of seeing how 6G is going to kind of implement that, you definitely need to watch out for how how they are relying on AI and machine learning, and how that's affecting your phone and all the data that you have in there. Because like especially when they first start rolling these out, they aren't going to be perfect, and there's going to be kind of like there might be instances where they are violating some sort of privacy laws and things like that. And it's also um it's also an issue like with surveillance. I feel like especially because it's your phone, and if these can get connected to like your camera or something like that, then they're essentially like spying on you. So it's a whole thing with privacy, and as a consideration to think about, just because how advanced the technology is. I think you just got to be wary. Especially in the future, it's more and more extreme. So I just think that there needs to be some level of ethical like consideration just held up there.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of ethical considerations with 6G, and I think they're not very different from the existing concerns from 5G. Like the 6G, I think one major concern with 6G is that the frequency is going to be a lot higher, and I feel like through that, while people are also getting smarter, and while computer science is a growing field, AI is also a growing field, and it's still considerably very raw right now compared to what it could potentially be in the future, and that's definitely very hard to project. But right now, like due to those high frequencies, I feel like in some cases where 6G like accidentally like maybe might miss a little bit of a step in its early like rollout, I think that's really easy to exploit. And once a hacker or someone like exploits something like that, like it could lead to really damaging circumstances for the person the victim that's being impacted. And I feel like those issues aren't that much different from the issues that come with 5G, like security and cybersecurity. There are always going to be issues, no matter with what, like, I guess, like network. There's no way to kind of make that perfect. I'd be surprised if there's any sort of perfect security or cybersecurity protection because that's just very hard to do. There's still a lot of concerns about that. There's a reason why TikTok is getting banned in the US. So I think though that issue just cannot go away. 6G it might make it a little bit better than 5G, but there's still gonna be a lot of people complaining about certain things relating to security and cybersecurity. So that's definitely unavoidable. So obviously there's a lot of ethical concerns with 6G. Hopefully whoever's developing 6G can alleviate the concerns a little bit compared to 5G, but I still expect to see a lot of people complaining about some of the ethical concerns that are related with 6G, which will include current concerns about security and cybersecurity. So that's it for our episode about 6G wireless networks and our initial thoughts about their future. And I'm your host, Jack, and see you on the next episode.